Hi guys, I'm Jacob Johnson with The Hill magazine. We are currently sitting on the top of the 4th floor of the Global Center on this glorious Chapel Hill day. I'm sitting down here with Deputy Chief of Staff Asher Hildebrand. He is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Congressman David Price of the 4th District. He has previously worked for the International Foundation for Electoral Systems in Beirut, and has also worked previously in 2 Washington-based think tanks. And we're just here today to talk about some of your time at Carolina. Professor Hildebrand is an alum. He graduated in 2003, and we're just going to talk a little bit more about that today. I guess first question, have you always been interested in public policy, or did something else initially catch your eye?
Thanks, Jacob, and appreciate you asking me to come here and talk on this glorious day, made only slightly less glorious by the heartbreaker we experienced last night. You know, if I would never tell my colleagues in the Department of Public Policy this today, but if you had asked me as a student here to define public policy or even to identify where the department was, I would not have been able to do either. In fact, I was a political science major as well as a psychology double major, and I sort of came to the concept of public policy a little late in my college career and almost by accident. It was my senior year. I made the decision to study abroad, which I recommend for every student. I spent a semester in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and it was at a time when the Argentinian economy was in ruins, the political system was in upheaval, and the impact of the government's policies on the lives of its citizens was very evident for even a relatively young and uninformed observer like me. So I came back to Chapel Hill, to campus, with a full head of steam. Started getting much more involved on campus and organizations, but also in thinking about my own career, started thinking about working for my government and the impact that I could have on people's lives through public policy. If I were doing it again, I might have at least taken the minor in public policy, if not the major. But as a student, I knew much less about it.
Okay. And kind of segueing into that, what are some clubs that you were involved with during your time here at Carolina?
Well, my other advice on that front would be to get involved early, and whether that's through a publication like The Hill or a campus organization. My approach to it was a little bit too little too late. I was focused more on our basketball team and my social life for the first couple of years here than I was on getting involved on campus. I was in the honors program, which was a great chance to take some good classes and get involved that way. But I didn't really have many campus affiliations until I did the study abroad in Argentina, and then came back afterwards. So that left only one semester because I studied abroad in my senior year. In that semester, I started going to meetings from everything from the campaign to end the death penalty, which met in the basement of the campus Y, to a lot of the activism that was going on surrounding the Iraq War. And in fact, this was in the spring of 2003. We had the United States had led a coalition invasion of Iraq that March. And so a lot of my interest in moving to D.C. and becoming interested in engaged in public policy as a career stemmed from my involvement on campus, with some of the anti-war activism that was going on. Also went to D.C. a couple of times that semester with student groups to participate in some of the protests that were going on. My hope was to go and stop the war single-handedly. That unfortunately didn't work so well. But I do think that ultimately our leaders brought our nation's policies in a direction that many of us had hoped for back then, 10 years ago.
Okay. And how would you say your career path led you to come back to Carolina? I know you're still working with Congressman Price, but what made you want to come back?
Well, it's always been a special place, and Chapel Hill has always been a special place, and a place that I've loved and held dear in my heart. I've always, in my career, tried to strike a balance between the practice of public policy and the study. So I left D.C. After my first stint there, went back to school, got a master's degree Another thing that I recommend
From Princeton.
From Princeton. Great place to spend a couple of years. Very fortunate to get to travel very widely during my time there, see a lot of the world, learn a lot. So I've always tried to, to balance on the one hand the need to take a step back, think in the big picture, think about long-term trends, think about the needs 20 years from now, 30 years from now that our society will face, and also to get involved, roll your sleeves up, and take action today to address those needs. And so when I transitioned down to North Carolina this last time, it was very much with the idea that I would take a step back, hopefully be able to share a little bit of my experience with students and those who are interested in public policy as careers themselves, but also do some long-term thinking about the direction that our state and our country should be heading in.
Okay. And do you actually have a specific area of expertise in policy that you just really love, or do you have a favorite, I guess, section?
If you had asked me 10 years ago, I would have said foreign affairs, and much of my career has been based on foreign affairs. I've been very lucky to work for a congressman, and Congressman Price, who was involved overseas. He co-chairs something called the House Democracy Partnership, which works with legislatures and emerging democracies to build their institutional capacity. In that role, I've had the opportunity to travel very widely, work with the staff of parliaments and emerging democracies to help consult them, advise them, offer encouragement and support as they go about building their institutions. So I've always been focused on international relations, but as the Congressman's legislative director and just in general, I've tended to show an interest in the full range of policy issues because as challenging and exciting and interesting as some of the challenges we face overseas are, we face some equally challenging and equally interesting challenges right here at home in our backyard. So whether it's education policy, the need for sounder environmental policy, or the need for sustainable economic development in our communities, I'm interested in all of those. In my current capacity with Congressman Price in North Carolina, a lot of what we do focuses on those closer to home issues.
Okay, and now I find it really interesting that you did work in Beirut, and it's completely different almost than working now in North Carolina. How has some of your time in Beirut influenced some of your policies and some of your political views, and as you bring into North Carolina?
Well, it's a good question. I would say the influence has gone the other way more so than in that direction. In that my experience growing up in North Carolina and learning in our state's public schools and public universities, gave me a certain orientation towards the world that made me interested in then going to Lebanon and taking a job there, which I did during grad school. Worked for the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, which is a great U.S.-based NGO that works with other countries to advise them on the conduct of free and fair elections. And while our own electoral system is far from perfect, it is something that many other countries have tried to emulate. And so when I was in Lebanon, we were working with the government of Lebanon to make sure that the laws governing the election that they were going to be holding in 2009 conform to international standards to the extent possible. And so I was able to bring a lot of my experience from North Carolina and from Washington to bear in an international setting. Now, I do hold a special place in my heart for Lebanon as well. It's one of the most fascinating and complex and interesting countries in the world. And my boss there for the summer was fond of saying that before you go to Lebanon, you can write a book on the country. After you've been off the plane for a couple days, you can write a chapter on the country. And if you've lived there for a couple years, then you can only write a paragraph. And that's his way of saying that it is just an intricately complex, challenging, interesting, but at the end of the day, extraordinarily human society that has managed to find a way to survive some extremely difficult circumstances in an extremely difficult region. And so I think we could learn a lot from that as well.
Okay, and then finally, it's a big international topic right now, and I'd love to get your take on it. What do you think about the current situation in the Ukraine, and do you think President Obama has handled it well?
Well, I'll answer your second question first, and I think that he's handled it as best as he could under the circumstances. I know he's received a lot of criticism for not doing more or taking a more muscular approach to to the conflict there. At the same time, the will of the American people is very clear on this issue. There is no appetite for another military intervention in a faraway place in the world, and there's certainly no appetite for taking on a country like Russia, given the history that our two nations have had. That being said, I do think there's a lot that can be done to respond to what is, in my view, a very clear violation of international law. The Obama administration has begun to lay out what that response would be in the form of economic sanctions and pressure, in the form of working with our international partners to make clear that this sort of behavior is not tolerable in the international community. The history of Crimea as a region of Ukraine is extremely complex. There are legitimate points of view on both sides of that conflict, but when one nation essentially annexes a region of another nation, that's a violation of international law any way you look at it. And so I'm hopeful that it's a situation that can be resolved peacefully. I'm hopeful that Ukraine, which is one of the countries that we've worked with in the House Democracy Partnership, is able to bounce back from this and to continue to strengthen its institutions and stay on a democratic trajectory. And I'm hopeful at the end of the day that Russia will learn that the consequences of this sort of action are greater than the benefits, and will feel isolated, and I think we're going to see some of that as these policies move forward.
All right, thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure, Jacob. Thanks for inviting me to the.
All right, guys, and stay tuned.